Celebrated 4th of July last Saturday. I don't know what you guys did, but Saturday evening we take our chairs out in our backyard and we wait for the fireworks to start over here at the school. And while we were out there, we set off some fireworks that we had bought for the grandsons at one of the stands, and I lit a few, and then I turned around and asked our oldest grandson if he'd like to light the rest of them. And kind of took me back. He said, "Well, Grandpa, I don't even know how to light a match." The question was, how can anybody not know how to light a match? And that got me thinking about Proverbs, and I started thinking about the fact of this sub-series in Proverbs, life skills. And I started thinking about all the simple life skills that we pick up along our journey in this life that help us to function in life. And there were a lot of them that I learned that I don't even remember learning, but they were just kind of passed on. My mom gave me a lot of them. My mom made sure I knew how to cook something before I left home, even if didn't have it then. But now, even if it's top ramen, you need to know how to cook that. She taught me how to do my laundry without turning my underwear pink. She taught me how to wash dishes without a dishwasher. She taught me how to make a bed. Just think about the life skills that you have learned that make you effective in life. My mom taught me about working hard to get until the job is done, and not stopping in the middle and walking away from it. My dad taught me about how to use a gun safely. Now that's an important life skill. I also learned how to field dress an animal. That's an important life skill. It will serve me well when there's no food available. But life skills all around us, the effectiveness and functionality of our lives determine on learning unlimited number of life skills. How to look somebody in the eye and talk with confidence. How to give somebody a good handshake. Who teaches us those things? And Dolores, I talked about it. I said, one of the things I realize when it comes to my grandsons is that I have the opportunity to help them to learn the life skills that go with being a man, along with their fathers. But to be able to just teach Avery how to light, simple thing of lighting a match last Saturday. Proverbs talks about life, and we define wisdom as being effective and skillful in living. And along with that, we broke it down, and Solomon talks a great deal about some basic life skills that are essential for navigating through our lives. Last week, we talked about the first one. Life skill number 1 was friendship. How to make a friend, how to maintain a friend, who to choose for friends, how to select friends. And I want to go back for a moment because I had somebody ask me this week, how do we avoid those wrong friends if we're supposed to be influencing them for Jesus? I want to understand, when I talk about friends, I'm talking about those people we attach ourselves to journey through life. Those who have an input in our lives. Those we allow to influence our lives. We can have relationships and we can shine the light of Jesus. But friends are like Jonathan and David, who knit their hearts together. Our friends are going to determine sometimes the effectiveness of our life and our godliness. So it's important. Well, today we're going to pick up the second life skill. These are in no particular order. I'm not saying that any one's more important than another. But I want to look at the life skill of authority. How do we deal? How do we exercise authority? How do we respond to authority? And I want to submit that for most of us, exercising authority is not so much a challenge for us as responding correctly to authority, at least for me. Well, I want us to dig into Proverbs and see what Solomon has to tell us about authority in our lives and recognize it. And I think that the natural place to begin is with a definition. What is authority? On your outline, it would be authority, a definition. Webster's 1828 dictionary says authority is legal power or a right to command or to act, power, rule, and sway. W.E. Vine's expository dictionary describes the biblical word as leave or permission, liberty of doing as one pleases, the right to exercise power, the power of one whose will and commands must be obeyed by others. Here's our working definition. When I talk about authority, I'm talking about those who have the right to command my life. Those who have the power to enforce and make rules. And those who have the right to demand obedience from others. That's the framework of understanding what authority is. And if we can agree with that, we can move forward. So a secondary question on that idea of authority is, where does authority come from? Where does one receive authority? Now, if you looked at our world, there would be a lot of suggestions. There would be those who would say, might makes right. The guy with the biggest weapons and the biggest tools gets to make the rules. Others would say, well, it's the golden rule. Not the golden rule we think of, but he who has the gold makes the rules. And looking at our American political scene, there are a lot of people who would say that's where we're at. The poor men, you ever notice poor men never get elected president? You ever notice somebody who doesn't have enormous financial backing doesn't become president anymore? So where does, and in a cynical world we would say, yeah, that pretty well summarizes where power comes from. But the Bible gives us a different source. Authority, according to God's word, flows down from God. I want to look at Romans 13, 1 and 2, as Paul talks about that concept. He says, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Now, let's make that a little broader. Let's not, and I want us to understand, the authorities he's talking about are not specific individuals. He is talking about authorities in our lives, and there are 4 particular categories that we're going to note in just a moment. But all authority, every authority in life comes from where? God. He has established it as the rule. In our country, not only does it flow down, it flows up. We are a representative, and this is a social political explanation. In our country, we are a representative republic, which means we as individuals choose those people that are going to represent us in Washington, D.C. The vote. By our vote, we give authority to others. Folks, let me just say that's why it's important for us to be involved in the voting process. We get to choose who is in authority over us. That's my political statement for the day. But it flows down, and here it flows up. But there are 4 particular areas that he has established, God has established. Number 1, the family. Their family is established with an authority. Parents, husbands, wives. There is an authority structure there. And I'm not going to read all these verses. I encourage you to go and look at them. But there's this state. 1 Peter 2 talks about submitting to the governing authorities. We have a responsibility to submit to them and accept their authority. They have the right to establish laws and expect us to conform to them. And we'll talk about more of that in a little bit. There is the local church. Hebrews 13:17 says, obey those who rule over you. You realize, and that last part of that verse is important because at the end of it says, your response basically is going to determine whether that individual's service as authority is joyful or a burden. If you're here today under the age of 18, let me tell you, you can make your parents' role as your parent joyful or burdensome, depending on your response. You can make your boss's life joyful or burdensome. My response to authority will determine the quality of their feeling and their life. And then number 4, the workplace. Ephesians 6 talks about masters, or slaves obey your masters, and masters take care of your servants. But that's the employer. Those 4 areas. And so all of you who are here waiting for that day, I'm going to get away from home, and I'm no longer going to have anybody telling me what to do. Mom and Dad can't tell me what to do. I'm going to be my own boss. Let me just burst that bubble for you right now. Because I don't care how old you are, you will always be under the authority of someone. So I want to begin with, so we have an understanding of what we're talking about. Everything we're going to talk about from here on talks about authority in family, in state, in local church, and workplace. Our response, our use of that authority, and my response to it. So let's move on. And to one last thing. Authority always comes with responsibility. You ever look at your parents and say, man, they have it so easy? You know, they get to make all the rules, they get to spend all the money, they get every privilege. But there's responsibility. Whenever you have authority, there is responsibility. And it's in Hebrews 13:17, they serve, talking about church leaders, but this refers to parents, it talks about governing authorities, it talks about anybody. They serve as individuals who must give an account. As a parent, I will be called before God to give an account for the way I exercise my authority and the decisions and choices I made. As an employer, as a government official, as a church leader, in every situation, there is a responsibility to do what God would have me do. So, are we good with the definition? Let's talk about how to use it. Oh, you know, I've read this quote. It simply says this. It comes from an article called "When Power Goes to Your Head, It May Shut Out Your Heart." Even the smallest dose of power can change a person. You've probably seen it. Someone gets a promotion or a bit of fame, and then suddenly they're a little less friendly to the people beneath them. The old saying is, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. One of the favorite stories our daughters like to tell us and remind us of is that when Nathaniel got old enough to take care of the girls while we had to leave the house for a while, is the amazing transformation that took place in him. He went from a mild-mannered, compliant child to a raging tyrant. And he would demand, you have to obey me. And he would make up rules, and he would inflict physical punishment on his daughter or sisters for not obeying him. So it kind of goes with that, the fact that most of us have experienced that at some level in our lives. That somebody gets a little bit of power, and it goes to their head, and they begin abusing it and misusing it. So it's important. If you have authority, if you receive authority, how do you use that? And Solomon identifies 2 main responsibilities for the exercise of authority. In Proverbs 16:10, the first is in regards to judgments. We could also say in decision making. It says, the lips of a king speak as an oracle, and his mouth should not betray justice. And verse 11, honest scales and balances are from the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of his making. Somebody has to be responsible for making decisions. Someone has to be the one, like Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. It follows down the line, and it has to stop someplace. And the one in authority has a responsibility for making those decisions and choices, that, if you would, the top of the food chain. Dolores handles the finances in our home because she's a whole lot better at it than I am. but it was a choice and a decision that was made between both of us. But let me just point out that I am still responsible for that decision. I'm the one who will give an account to that. Somebody has to be, for lack of a better term, the boss. Those in authority are designed and equipped for judgments, decision making. They're also there to administer justice. Let me put a picture up here for you to look at. What do you notice about this statue we call Lady Justice? Blindfolded. That blindfold suggests that true justice never sees people for who they are, their social standing. They see everyone. They don't see who they are. They see that they understand it's a person. Anything else you see? Sword. A sword. What? Authority gives the right to that one in authority to administer justice and discipline and punishment for disobedience. What else? The scale. What do you notice about the scale? It's balanced. There is no weighting it one way or the other. God's standards are all the standard. God has established, that one verse 11 says honest scales are from God. Another place it says God hates differing measures. How many differing measures do we have in our nation today for people? Every one of us. Red, white, blue, purple, every one of us stand on the same ground in God's sight. That's justice. That is the kind of justice that authority is to hand out. No favorites, no being swayed by bribes. Just administer justice. If you look at chapter 20, verse 8 and 26, he says, when a king sits on his throne to judge, he winnows out all evil with his eyes. In verse 26, a wise king winnows out the wicked. He drives the threshing wheel over them. Those are pleasant images, but he has the right and has the duty to exercise, administer justice to those beneath him. That, whether we're talking about a government official or a parent or a boss at work, they have that responsibility and that authority. Solomon identifies 3 essential qualities for the proper exercise. And these are qualities perhaps would serve us well in thinking about who we're going to choose to rule or govern our land. But number 1 quality, if you want to use authority correctly, is to establish righteousness, to live a righteous life. Again, 16, he says in chapter 16, verse 12. Get my pages and stuff. Kings detest wrongdoing, for a throne is established through righteousness. And verse 13, he says, kings take pleasure in honest lips. They value a man who speaks the truth. Righteousness, simply defined, is a life lined out by God. A life lived in compliance with God's standards. If you want to exercise authority properly, develop righteousness in your life. I always like Jesus' definition. He says, in the world it says, that rulers rule and they use it to oppress people, but I tell you, if you want to be great in my kingdom, greatness and authority in my kingdom is exercised by becoming the servant of all. Service. Number 2, flee from evil influences. 25 talks about purifying gold and silver. You pass the silver through the furnace and out comes something that can be used. Authority needs to be free from evil influences. Covetousness. There he talks about wanting things and valuing things over people. Chapter 28. Sorry, my pages are sticking together. 28 and verses 15 and 16 says, "A tyrannical ruler lacks judgment, but he who hates ill-gotten gain will enjoy a long life. A man tormented," it's the wrong one. Verse 15, "like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked man ruling over a helpless people." Covetousness. What is covetousness? I define it this way: allowing things, position, and power to become more important than people. When I allow things, position, and power to become more important than the people who I have authority over, then I have become covetous, and that is an evil influence in my life. Bribery. Bribery is slipping a gift to another in order to sway their opinion. Our political system doesn't know anything about that today, does it? We don't call it bribery. We call it special interest groups. We call it lobbyists. I want to suggest today that entire system in our government is nothing more than what Solomon is talking about here. If you give me enough money, I will vote the way you want me to vote. It's bribery. And it has corrupted our representative government. Bribery corrupts on the job. Bribery corrupts at home. If you want to use authority properly, don't allow anyone to sway you by gifts. I like this one. Avoid women and alcohol. Go to Proverbs 31, 2 through 5. King Lemuel's mother writes these words: "The sayings of King Lemuel, an oracle his mother taught him. O my son, O son of my womb, O son of my vows, do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what the law decrees and deprive all the oppressed of their rights." How many names, and I don't want you to mention them, how many names can you think of in the recent history of individuals whose lives and work and standing in the community have been brought down because of sexual immorality or addiction? There are numberless numbers of pastors and preachers in this nation whose lives have been torpedoed because of immorality. There are politicians whose lives have been ruined because of failure to observe this particular concept. He's not talking about being single. He's not talking about not getting married, but just don't let that adulterous woman rule your life. Then the last one I think is important. Mercy and equity. Drop down to verses 8 and 9 of chapter 31. Here's the role of kings, defined by King Lemuel's mother. "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." Now, he's not talking about social welfare. He's not talking about providing all their needs, but he is talking about being a voice for those who have been pushed to the sidelines, those who don't have the means to hire the best attorney to go to court. Stand up for those who don't have the power to stand up for themselves and represent them and give them justice, mercy, and equity, equality. Treat everyone the same. So if you're an authority, if you're a parent, if you're a boss at work, or if, I don't know if we have any political officials here, but if any of those realms fit you, this is how authority is to be used. But then we come to here's the rub. How do we respond? And I've already said, I bet most of us, if we have a problem in regards to authority, it rests here. Respond. How do I deal with the authorities? My kids, how are you to respond to your parents? Guys at work, how are you supposed to respond to your employer? How do we respond to the government? How do we respond in all those areas? He identifies 3 duties. First, he says to honor them. 21 through 21 and 22. He who pursues... That is not right. 24. Get my eyes on right. 24, 21. Fear the Lord and the King, my son, and do not join with the rebellious. For those who too will send sudden destruction upon them, and who knows what calamities they can bring. Notice the link. Fear God and fear the King. Honor is the idea behind the word. And one guy I was reading this week, he said that word honor means that they have weight in your life. That when they speak, you listen. Do you have those people in your life? Do you know that person in your life when they speak? You're listening because you know that their words are important to you and are wise. Do you have that person in your life? Honor the authorities in your life. When your boss at work speaks, honor them by giving their words weight. When your parents speak, honor them by giving their words weight by listening and obeying. So our first response is to give credit and give weight to those who are in authority. And I know every one of us chafe and every one of us resist like that donkey with the harness whenever we think about honoring those who are in authority over us in the government. But that's our duty. Now, I will give you that there are some limitations to that, but we will talk about that in a moment. But honor them. Give them weight in your life. Give them significance. Number 2, work for their favor when possible and permissible. I thought of this example earlier. I wanted you to think about Joseph. Joseph was living in Egypt. He got sent there, sold as a slave, and he moved up through the ranks and became second in power to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, would you say Pharaoh was a godly man? Joseph was a godly man. But what did Joseph do in the entire time he was serving under Pharaoh? Worked for Pharaoh's best. He honored him. He worked for their favor. He worked to promote them. He saved Pharaoh's bacon when the drought came and the famine came. Work for their benefit. On the job, work to make your boss look good. At home, work to make your parents look good. Work for their favor. And notice underneath I put down when possible and permissible. Daniel was another who served under several kings, and he tried to promote them and help them every way he could, but there was a line, right? When they came and said, you cannot pray anymore, Daniel said, yeah, I can't do that. And he continued praying. Ended up in the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, everyone has to bow down to this golden image. They refused to bow the knee and were thrown into the fiery furnace. Peter and John quit preaching the name of Jesus, and Peter and John said, I don't know, we have to obey God rather than man. There is a limit. We need to work for the benefit of those in authority over us, but folks, there is a limit. When the government comes out and tells us we have to begin issuing licenses for same-sex marriage, as a preacher, you don't have an option. You have to do those marriages. If you do marriages, it's time for us to stand up and say, I'm sorry. you don't have the authority to change what God designed. And we have to be willing, like those men, to be willing to pay the consequence for that. There is a limit. But we need, if it doesn't conflict with what God has already said, we need to comply to them. Finally, and this is not from the book of Proverbs, but I took it out of Timothy, our responsibility is to pray for them. Pray for those who are in authority, kings and governors and all those in authority, that you may live quiet and peaceful lives. Who do we include in those authorities? All four. Kids, pray for your parents. Guys, pray for and ladies, pray for your boss. Pray for those who are governing our nation. Pray for your church leaders. And he adds on at the end of that, says this is good and pleasing to God. So how much time do we spend praying for those in authority over us compared to the time we spend complaining about those in authority over us? The battle is spiritual. And we do not change the outcome of this battle by changing leaders. Physically, we win the battle by changing the hearts of those who are leading. Jesus is the answer for our nation. So pray for them. And then we have seven qualities that help us have a proper response. Number one, wise conduct. What's wisdom? Skillful living. It's knowing what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Pattern your life after that. Righteous speech. It talks about the king loving honest lips. Have purity of heart and gracious lips. Let's take a moment to look at that. Chapter 22, verse 11. He says, "He who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king for his friend." You ever notice how the tone of voice you use affects a person's response? I have always told my kids, you can say anything you want to me or your mother, as long as it's done graciously and respectfully. It's amazing how different people respond based on the language and tone of voice we use. Excellence in labor. Yeah, this guy excels at his work. In Proverbs 22 says, if you excel at your work, he will serve kings and not obscure men. You want a promotion at work? How should you do that? By being excellent at your job. You want your parents to think well of you and entrust you with more responsibility? Then do what they give you to do well. We have fallen into the trap of thinking anything will do. God calls us to excellence. The best we can possibly do. Self-control. Took me a while to look at this one and figure it out. Proverbs 23, 1 through 3 says, when you go to the king's house, put a knife to if you're given to gluttony, put a knife to your throat. Because he goes on to talk about the fact that if you go into a king's presence and you eat his food and receive his favor, you become obligated to him. Self-control. How much do we need that in response to authority? When somebody tells us to do something we don't want to do, how do we respond? Do we blow up? Do we go out and start talking to everybody? Do we start complaining? Do we start resisting? Self-control is the ability to do what I need to do and do what God has called me to do. Humility. This one kind of goes along with what Jesus talked about at one point. In chapter 25, verses 6 and 7, he says, "Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence. Do not claim a place among great men. It's better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than for him to humiliate you before the nobleman." Jesus told a parable about a feast. He says, when you go to the feast, don't go up and sit down at the head place of the table and say, I know this place is for me. And the king or the guy comes along and says, "Yeah, well, no, you're back down here." He says it's better if you go to a feast to take the place at the end of the table, the most lowly, the most humble place, and to have the king say, "Oh, why are you sitting there? You come up here with me." Humility before those who lead. Don't exalt ourselves. Patience and gentleness. Oh, it's hard to be patient. It's hard to be gentle. Chapter 25, 1 or 15 says, "Through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone." We need patience and gentleness to respond properly. Proper use of and response to authority begins. This is kind of what I want to leave us with today. Is that if I'm going to respond to an authority properly in my life, it begins with a proper response to the one who possesses all authority. I can't give respect and compliance to an authority if I have not given myself to the authority of God. Jesus Christ, King of kings and Lord of lords. If I bow my knee to him, if I give him my proper response, the rest no longer becomes an act of work. It becomes natural to let him work through me. So as you think about this idea of authority, perhaps the biggest question we need to ask ourselves: what authority does Jesus hold in my life today? Will I bow my knee to him as my authority? Will I respond to him in humility? Will I respond to him and make him Lord of my life and ruler of my life? And as we've been saying all through our study of Proverbs, our decision regarding him today will determine our destiny tomorrow. That's a theme that runs through Proverbs over and over again. The decision I make today determines my destiny tomorrow. And that is it can be on the most practical level. If I go home as a kid and I mouth off to my parents today, it's going to determine my destiny for tomorrow. My decision about Jesus today is going to determine my destiny for eternity. What will you do with the authority of Jesus in your life today? Today's an opportunity to acknowledge him, King of kings and Lord of lords, Savior of life, the one whose blood cleanses us from every sin. If you will, how will you respond to his authority today? Father, thank you for the pleasure of being here today. Thank you for the power that you have hidden in your word for us to discover. Thank you for the practicality. Lord, these are lessons we need to learn if we're going to be successful, if we're going to be effective, we're going to be fulfilled in life. Lord, just like every other life skill we need to learn, these are crucial. Help us not to just walk away and cast the notes or close the Bible and never think about it again. Help us to let these things penetrate to our heart and change us into living a life that brings glory to you. Lord, today as we close this service, we're going to see Jesus enthroned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If there is one here today who needs to come and bow their knee to him to find the salvation he came to give, would you draw them by the Spirit's power today? Would you let the Spirit speak and move us in every way today? In Jesus' name, amen.
In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. Oh, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Oh, you can have all this world. Just give